Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out again for our next speaker here at the Pennsylvania Association of Numismatists. It's my pleasure to introduce to you today Bill Bierly. Bill has done extensive research on the motto, "In God We Trust," its origins, where it all began, how it began. His book, "In God We Trust," will be available today as well. It's available through Whitman if you're watching via the video. Bill's done, as I've mentioned, done extensive research, and whether it was at Penn State or different areas, that a very significant study. So on behalf of the association, please welcome Bill Bierly.
This is really a Pennsylvania story, or largely a Pennsylvania story, and without Tom and other folks in Penn's help, I would have never been able to do this book. They gave me ideas, people to talk to and so on, and so I really grateful to Penn for getting me started on this thing. I'm from northern Indiana, and I've lived in many different places, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois, and so on, but I think Pennsylvania is sort of my ancestral home. My forebears came into Philadelphia back in 1743, and so I feel at home here in Pennsylvania. So, but anyway, as for the book, it was a long time developing. I started collecting pattern coins back in the 70s, and I was collecting somewhat randomly, but actually I got this pattern from Stax sometime in the 70s. Thought, this is curious, God or trust, what's this all about? So it kind of planted the seed in my mind that I wondered what this was all about. Over a period of many years, I started digging into the background of this, and that was really the origins of this book. To really start then the story, this is the State House in Montgomery, Alabama. And Montgomery was the original capital of the Confederacy until Virginia seceded, and then they moved it to Richmond. But Montgomery was the first capital. And in February 8th, 1861, there were delegates from 6 southern states that met to start to draw up a new constitution for the Confederacy. And there were 6 states. The Confederate Constitution in many ways was similar to the federal Constitution, the 1787 Constitution, but they made some changes. And one of them, the significant one that we're concerned with, they added a preamble, or they changed the preamble from the federal Constitution and it said, "We, the deputies of the sovereign states of South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana, invoking the favor of Almighty God, do hereby, in behalf of these states, ordain and establish this Constitution for the provisional government of the same." So they had that phrase in there, invoking the favor of Almighty God. Well, it may not seem like a big deal, but what was going on was that the federal Constitution had no reference to God. In 1787, the founding fathers had chosen not to have any mention of God. In the Bill of Rights, there was things about freedom of religion and so on, but there was no invoking the favor of God or anything like that. And that had been a sore spot for a lot of people. It said, some people said, this is a godless Constitution. And people would write to George Washington and say, you made a big mistake, by not putting something about God in the Constitution. And he wrote back some pretty interesting letters too, saying, well, we're interested in government, not in your souls, so go to your ministers to deal with religious issues. I thought he had some pretty good stuff. But anyway, this still continued to be a sore point, and clergy, both North and South, thought this had been an omission. Well, anyway, then they did that on February 8th, 61. About a month later, March 11th, 1861, they had another constitutional convention. This was to actually adopt a permanent constitution. And by then, more states had joined the Confederacy and so on, and they'd actually come up with a name for the country. And this preamble read, "We, the people of the Confederate States of America," there's the name, "each state acting in its sovereign and independent character in order to form a permanent federal government, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, invoking the favor and guidance of Almighty God, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the Confederate States of America." So that was a permanent part of their new Constitution. This created, as I say, it might not seem like such a big deal to us, but this created great reaction in both the South and in the North. In the South, the Southern clergy were very excited about this. Say, okay, we're on God's side. That we're recognizing God, and I have many quotations in the book from these various ministers. One of them was Reverend James Thornwell from South Carolina. He was a Presbyterian minister, and he preached in some sermons. He said, "We shall have a government that acknowledges God, that reverences right, and that makes law supreme. We are therefore fighting not for ourselves alone, but when the struggle is rightly understood, for the salvation of the whole continent." And another man, Reverend Benjamin Palmer from New Orleans, he said, "The Confederate Constitution is a truly Christian patriot's prayer, unlike the perilous atheism of the U.S. Constitution. The Founding Fathers were too much influenced by free thinking and infidel spirit that was often associated with the horrors of the French Revolution. The Confederate founders made a conscious effort to avoid the scandalous secularism of the U.S. Constitution. It had a clear, solemn, official recognition of Almighty God." There were many such sermons and so on along the same lines. Well, in the North too, then you had a reaction. Many people thought, the South has kind of stolen a march on us here, We're they're showing them to be more religious than us. And one man in particular, Reverend Horace Bushnell, he preached various sermons and did some writing that, maybe we should amend the federal Constitution to include some such language like the South has here. And there were many such letters and reactions and so on. One man took a slightly different stance. This was Reverend Mark Watkinson. He was a Baptist minister, rather obscure, in Ridleyville, Pennsylvania. He saw all that was going on. He had a very interesting background too. I hesitate to get into it too much because in the interest of time, but he had been a minister. He started in Ridleyville, but he got a position in Portsmouth, Virginia, and he'd done very well there. He built up the church in Portsmouth, the Baptist church there, Court Street Baptist Church, and he's very successful. But then as the war drew near and tensions between North and South, he found himself in kind of a difficult position. He was a Northerner, but he was in a Southern church, and it seems he was giving mixed messages about his loyalties. And finally, when Virginia seceded, and Portsmouth, of course, it had a naval base there. It's right across from Norfolk, and the federal government, evacuated the base, and there was rioting in the streets, and there was fighting and so on. And I think he decided it was time to get out of town. So he sent his family back to Ridleyville, and then he jumped on the last ship going north and ended up back in Ridleyville. And his personal situation suffered drastically. there had been a substitute minister in his old pulpit in Ridleyville, and he stepped aside for Watkinson to come back in, but the salary was a fraction of what he'd been making in Portsmouth. So I think he was living on, his family were living on donated vegetables from the congregation. But so as 1861 rolled on, he saw what was happening. You know, the North was suffering military losses, and of course he was aware of all this, of the Southern Constitution, and that troubled him deeply, that he felt that something needed to be done. This is actually the church that stands on the site of his church at that time. And he sat down on November 13th, 1861, and wrote this letter to Salmon Chase, the Secretary of the Treasury. Let's try to read it quickly here. Dear sir, you are about to submit your annual report to Congress respecting the affairs of the national finances. One fact touching our currency has hitherto been seriously neglected. I mean the recognition of the Almighty God in some form on our coins. You're probably a Christian. What if our republic were now shattered beyond reconstruction? Would not the antiquaries of succeeding centuries rightly reason from our past coins that we were a heathen nation? What I propose is that instead of the goddess of liberty, we shall have next inside the 13 stars a ring inscribed with the words perpetual union. Within this ring, the all-seeing eye crowned with a halo. Beneath this eye, the American flag bearing in its fields stars equal to the number of states united. In the folds of the bars, the words God, liberty, law. This would make a beautiful coin to which no possible citizen could object. This would relieve us from the ignominy of heathenism. This would place us openly under the divine protection we have personally claimed. From my heart, I have felt our national shame in openly disowning God as not the least of the causes of our present national disasters. To you first, I address a subject that must be agitated. Yours most respectfully, M.R. Watkinson, Minister of the Gospel. So this goes to Chase. It's a very emotional letter, you know, and you don't really understand maybe what he's talking about, but I think if you look in the context of that Confederate Constitution, that's what he's talking about, that, you know, somehow the North or the federal government needs to catch up with the South. And, well, he sends it off to Chase. You might think that, now he was quite a religious man. He had been raised by his uncle, who had been the Episcopal bishop west of the Allegheny Mountains. He had lived with his uncle for a number of years. His uncle had raised him and educated him. And so he was a religious man. He was a strong Episcopalian. Well, he gets this letter. You might expect he would kind of just toss it or ignore it, but instead of that, he kind of took interest in it. He passed it on to this man, James Pollock. Now, you Pennsylvanians probably know him. He was the governor of Pennsylvania, and he was a 4-time congressman from Pennsylvania, very successful governor. And he had, when he was in Congress, he was a Whig. He had roomed with Lincoln. You know, Lincoln served one term in Congress, and he overlapped that term. And in fact, they had shared in renting a room in the same boarding house and so on. And so they were friends. They shared a lot of the same political views and so on. And so I don't have any written evidence, but I think for whatever reason, Pollock wanted to be director of the mint. And so I think he got a hold of Lincoln and said, you know, this is a position I would like. And he had been the first Republican governor of Pennsylvania. They were both Republicans at this point, and Lincoln certainly respected him. So he got the job. He was director of the mint. So Chase forwarded a letter to Pollock, and he put it with a memo, and he said, this was dated November 20th, 1861. It's only a week after Watkinson had written the letter. No nation can be strong except in the strength of God, or safe except in his defense. The trust of our people in God should be declared on our national coins. You will cause a device to be prepared without unnecessary delay, with a motto expressing in the fewest and tersest words possible this national recognition. Signed, Salmon P. Chase. Pollock received the letter, and it talks about preparing a device recognizing this national, reliance on God or whatever. But there was no specific instruction as to what that motto might be. So I think he consulted with James Longacre, the mint engraver, and they talked it over. And one or the other of them realized that the final stanza of the Star Spangled Banner has this phrase, "And this be our motto, in God is our trust." So I thought, well, that might work. And then Longacre, looking more closely, said, well, it's too long to fit on a coin. I think we need to shorten it. So he said, how about God our trust? So they agreed on that. This is the $50 of the time. This is dated 1842, but seated Liberty dollar. In the reverse, you kind of have an empty space over the eagle's head. So Longacre said, we've got a vacant space there, let's use that. And so he produced some pattern coins, some pattern $50. This is one of them in 1861. This one was in copper. He struck them both in copper and in silver. And lo and behold, he put God our trust over the eagle's head in that vacant space. He did it in silver too. There's a silver version. And there it is again, God our trust in silver. And then they thought, well, maybe we should do it on another coin too. How about the $10 gold piece, the eagle? We saw that motto, God our trust, was in rather plain letters over the eagle's head. They also decided to put it on a scroll or banner. And Chase thought that would be more ornate, and he thought that the plain letters were just too simple. So they struck this as a second example. Well, here's the $10 gold piece of the era, 1861. Same thing. It had an empty space over the eagle's head. So they did the same thing exactly. So he did both the $50 and the $10 gold piece, although he did it in copper only, but had God our trust on. And they produced these coins, and he, toward the end of 61, I believe it was December 26th, day after Christmas, 1861, he wrote a letter to Chase. And he said, okay, we've followed your instruction here. We've produced some specimen coins, and I'm enclosing them for your review. Let us know what you think. Should we go ahead and prepare dies for the general circulation with this motto, or we're open to, we want your further instruction. And well, they didn't hear anything. And time passed, and Pollock reminded Chase. There was a letter that he sent later asking, if he thought about this or what to do, but there was still no response. And I've been kind of puzzled. I think as I was working on this, I was very puzzled why Chase didn't respond, because he had told them to do this. And well, let's go on. Let's advance. Okay. Well, you look at what was going on at the time. Chase was running into a severe financial situation. Financing the war was becoming a big problem, and the banks were refusing to exchange any paper money for gold or silver. So there was a hoarding of the gold and silver, and well, in this period of time, then Chase moved to actually produce a federal currency, a paper currency, as one way of financing the war. And that's a whole separate topic. The book has a lot more detail on this that I want to go into today, but in any case, Chase was pretty preoccupied, and plus he was getting legislation passed to create an income tax, a federal income tax for the first time, and also they drastically increased tariffs, import tariffs, to raise money. Before the war, the South had been very strongly opposed to tariffs because they were exporting a lot of agricultural goods, cotton and so forth, and they didn't want retaliation from Europe. So they, in Congress, they had always blocked any major tariff bills. Well, these people were all gone from Congress now. You know, they'd gone south, so you had more protectionist people in Congress now. So they passed rather strong tariff regulation, mainly as a means to raise money for the war. But anyway, they produced paper currencies. One of the things is these were demand notes, and they were still convertible to silver or gold, although it was a little bit unclear in the legislation. Later, they switched to what we now call greenbacks. They were not redeemable into gold and so on, and this was one of the major means of financing the war. Yeah, that's just the back of it. 1862 rolls around, and Pollock had not got any response from Chase on this motto issue, so he went ahead and had more patterns struck. He had exactly the same coin struck, dated 1862. And we can go ahead and advance. We'll just show they're the same coins as the 1861 varieties. Okay, and he redid the $10 eagles again. There's the plain letters type. And then we had the scroll type. Well, let's go ahead then. Same thing. 1860 passed on, and again, Pollock reminded Chase about this, but had no response. So 63, he did the same thing. I think he'd picked this up as his pet project. And so he had these same patterns exactly struck in 63. Now, at the same time, you had other things going on in the economy. People had hoarded all the gold and silver coins. It wasn't circulating. Merchants couldn't get any change. And well, one idea to remedy this was use postage stamps. And Chase got Congress to pass a bill that postage stamps could be used in lieu of coins. And well, you know, it kind of worked. You had denominations on the stamps. Let's advance here again. You know, okay, they didn't always match. Here's a 24-cent stamp. Well, it's about a quarter. You know. So the post office was deluged with people buying stamps to be used as change. And Chase hadn't really cleared this with the Postmaster General. So they got in a big fight about that. They were enemies for life over this thing. And later, well, we won't get into it later, when Chase wanted to become Supreme Court Justice, that fellow opposed him, you know. But anyway, Chase was appointed. But so anyway, stamps were used, but you know, they had problems. You were carrying these around in your pocket. They, you know, got clumped up into kind of a gummy mess, and if it rained, you were in real troubles. Well, one man named Galt had the idea of producing little brass cases to contain the stamps in, kind of protect them. Had a sheet of mica over them. You're familiar with these, you know, that's encased postage stamps. And well, you know, and we'll advance it too. On the back, you could put an advertisement too. So they did come into some usage, but manufacturing these things was not easy. You know, you had to produce a case and put the stamp in and put the mic in. It wasn't really very practical. So somebody in the Treasury Department came up with another idea. And this was to produce these fractional currency notes. And this actually was pretty successful. It ended up being 7 different issues of these, and they went all the way from 5 cents up to, I don't know what the high was, 75 cents, I suppose. And there were 7 different issues, and people pretty much accepted them. They didn't have much choice. So that really helped remedy the coin shortage, at least from 5 cents up. But you still had a problem with pennies, with the 1 cent, because people started hoarding the pennies as well, not just the silver and gold coins. Pollock was getting these letters from all over the country saying, we need more cents, we need more pennies, send us 1,000 cents. Well, he couldn't pump them out quickly enough. That's just the reverse of one of the notes. Let's go ahead. Yeah, another item to note on these fractional currency things, there were so many produced of different designs because there were 7 different issues, and people were confused, what's the real one? And there were a lot of counterfeits being made too. So the Treasury Department put out these currency shields that this was the first 3 issues they put on this thing. And so if a banker wanted one of these, he could order it and hang it on the wall, and he got a note in, he said, okay, this looks like it's real, So, and merchants, same thing. So Treasury printed up quite a few. They didn't sell as many as they thought they would. And of course, today they're highly collectible. They estimate that there may be a couple hundred of these still in existence. So, but anyway, let's go ahead. Well, we're talking about the pennies again. The penny of the era is, I'm sure most of you know, was the copper nickel cent. What was it? 75% copper and 25% nickel, and it had a whitish appearance. In fact, people called these nickels at the time. They didn't have a 5 cent nickel coin. It was half dimes made in silver at that time. So anyway, this was kind of a stumbling block for upping production. Number one, it was getting harder to get nickel, and it was expensive. And also, nickel being a hard metal, it tended to wear out the dies rather quickly. And so it was hard to really increase production to the levels they needed. So let's go ahead. We'll see the reverse of that. Let's go ahead then. Well, enterprising entrepreneurs came up with solutions to this. And this is a Civil War token, a so-called store card. And you could have these made. There were many die sinkers that were making these things all over the country. And this particular one's from my hometown, LaPorte, Indiana. It was for a watchmaker and jeweler. And it was made really of copper, in some cases of bronze with a little bit of nickel or tin or something mixed in. Let's go ahead and advance. That's just the reverse. They often had a little patriotic symbol on the back. And again, these became pretty successful. People accepted them. Let's go ahead. There's another example, also from my hometown. It's a clothing store. And let's go ahead. There's the reverse of it. And it was made by Childs Manufacturing in Chicago, which produced a huge number of these things. In addition to those store cards, they had patriotic tokens that had just a general patriotic slogan. It didn't have any name of a store or anything. Yeah, here's another example. Picture of a cannon, Peacemaker. The idea, let's fight the war, let's win the war. There's one with the flag of our country. So again, these became pretty successful. Merchants could buy them for maybe 70 cents, or say, 70 cents per 100, say. And so they could make a little money, you know, as well as using them for change. And the idea was that if they gave them out in change, you could bring it back and redeem it later, you know, for some other goods and so on. And this seemed to work. The merchants were making a little money and the customers were happy. They were made of copper for the most part, and Pollock recognized this. He realized, hey, we don't need nickel in the penny to make them circulate. We could reduce our costs and speed up our production and everything. We just got rid of the nickel and switched to bronze. That was a good idea, and he got Chase to propose it to Congress, but this man named Joseph Wharton, he was a Pennsylvanian too, he had the only nickel mine in the United States, and he'd been providing nickel for the production of these cents. He didn't want to lose his biggest customer, and he had a lot of influence in Congress. So this got stalled in Congress. It was held up, and Pollock became quite frustrated because he was falling further behind in production, and he finally wrote to Chase and he said, you know, I'm just going to stop making pennies because I can't get enough nickel, and what I get is expensive. It doesn't make any sense. Well, Chase realized there was a problem. So he went to Congress, really used his influence to get legislation passed, and that was the let's see, the Mint Act of April 22nd, 1864, and that called for the change of the composition of the cent. It went to bronze, 95% copper, 5% tin or zinc, and they went with that. And now that same act, which Pollock wrote, by the way, contained a provision they will also produce 2-cent pieces made from bronze. And as part of that, it said, the shape, mottos, and devices of said coins, that's the 2-cent piece, shall be fixed by the director of the mint with the approval of the Secretary of the Treasury. So this gave Pollock kind of free rein to design these things any way he wanted, add any mottos he wanted, and so he moved forward. This is an example of the bronze cent. As you see, it's a more reddish in appearance, and this was a very successful metal. This was used until what year, 82 or something, when we switched to a zinc core cent. So, you know, lasted a long time. Let's advance. And there's a reverse. But let's jump ahead. Well, again, I have not found concrete writing about this, but I believe that Chase got with Wharton and said, look, you know, if you drop your opposition to this, we've got to do something about the pennies, about the cents. If you drop your opposition, we'll use some of your nickel. You know, we'll produce a 3-cent nickel piece. And well, that's what happened. They produced a 3-cent nickel starting in 1865. Yeah, let's go ahead. There's the reverse. And then not only that, but let's move ahead again. In 1860, well, he produced some patterns in 65, but 66, they produced a 5-cent coin made of nickel. And that's why we call the nickel now, the 5-cent coin the nickel. And that was a shield design. And you notice up there it has "In God We Trust." Now this was 1866, but we'll get to that. Here Pollock had the power now to do the designs and so on, and he came up with, along with Longacre, I think, this coin, the pattern coin. It had "God and our country" on as the motto, stated 1863 with Washington's head. And let's go to the next one. It had 2 cents with cents sharply curved there. And then he did a second example too. Let's advance. This is a shield design, and he still had "God our trust" as the motto on the reverse. And he sent these to Chase, And Chase agreed with these things. He approved them, but he said, you know, instead of God our trust, why don't we have our God in our country? And Pollock wrote back, said, I don't like that idea. And Chase then said, well, how about in God we trust? And Pollock, I don't think he wanted to get in any fight with Chase over this. He wanted to get something done. So he said, well, yeah, okay, in God we trust would work. I still prefer God our trust, but we don't have to worry about this yet. Let's wait until the legislation goes through. And so these were the patterns that were being studied at the time. They were in late 63. By early 64, they decided on a design and so on. But note, instead of God our trust, they had in God we trust. Pollock wrote to Chase and said, okay, here's another pattern coin. It has in God we trust, if that's what you prefer. And I never saw any responses back from Chase, but evidently he was okay with it. And so this became the standard 2-cent piece. And this is a pattern, actually. It was done in very early 1864. And if we go to the next slide, you see it still has a sharply curved cents. So they hadn't changed that. But when they went to the regular issue, let's advance again. Okay, there we have in God we trust, the shield. Let's advance. There it had cents rather straight. Now why they changed that, I don't know. But this became the standard 2-cent piece. All this helped to eliminate the coin problem, you know, the fractional currency, and producing the bronze cent and the 2-cent piece. It all helped. In the next annual report that Pollock wrote, he was very excited. He said, we have put God's name on our coins, and they're beautiful coins, and everybody approves of them, you know. And and I tried to go back and research some of the newspapers of the time to see what reaction was to these. And generally, it was favorable or just kind of a neutral take. You know, people say, okay, we got a new coin, and this is what it looks like, and so on, really without commenting much. And but there wasn't any major opposition to it. There were a few people, but not many. So I guess Pollock was okay in saying that people loved it, you know. So, well, this having happened, Pollock had succeeded in getting a religious motto on the coins. But his next annual report, he said, you know, this shouldn't just be on the 2-cent piece. This needs to be on all our coins, you know. This, in God we trust. And God isn't just the God of bronze, he's the God of silver and gold too. And so he started pressing to have it put on all the coins. And by this time, Chase was gone as Treasury Secretary. He'd gotten, there were problems between him and Lincoln, and he had submitted his resignation various times, and Lincoln had said, no, we need you. You know, I want you to withdraw that resignation. Well, at one point, he went too far, and Lincoln accepted the resignation, and I think he was rather shocked that it happened. But anyway, so there was a different Secretary of the Treasury at the time, and Pollock submitted these pattern coins. Here's a copper $50 dated 1865, and let's go to the next one here. And it had "In God We Trust" over the eagle. This was proved through the Mid-Act of March 3rd, 1865, and it called for all the coins large enough to accommodate it to carry this motto, "In God We Trust." And so we'll just run through quickly. Here's the dollar, and they had, of course, the same motto over the eagle. And we'll go ahead. There's a $5 gold piece, also struck in copper. In 1865, these were all done in copper. There are maybe a couple examples in gold or silver. Well, in silver there are a few more patterns, but they're pretty rare. So most of them are in copper. Let's go ahead. There's the $10 gold piece. Same thing, get the idea. Okay, and here's the 20. Okay, we'll go ahead. See, it's a little bit different from the other. You've got it over the eagle, but it's contained within that ring of stars. So, you know, that's really basically my story of how the motto was placed on the coinage. My talk probably is only covering I'd say 40 or 50%, less than 50%, 40% of my book, because I carry on, you know, what happened after all this, you know, with the motto and so on. And it was on most of the coins after that, except that, and it wasn't, the legislation didn't require it, it allowed it. You know, it was kind of up to the director of the mint with the approval of the Secretary of Treasury. And so you had some coins that didn't have it. That shield nickel we saw, it had it. But the V nickel, the Liberty nickel from 1883, did not have it. And the Morgan dollar had it, although there was some correspondence about that, but they finally put it on the Morgan dollar. Well, I won't get into detail on this, but you may know a little bit of the story. By the time Teddy Roosevelt became president, he had this idea that American coinage was just ugly, and we needed to redo our coinage. So he consulted with Augustus St. Gaudens about redesigning at least the gold coin. They looked at the legislation, figure out what they could do at that time, and so the $10 and $20 gold pieces were eligible to be changed. So he got St. Gaudens to redesign those. St. Gaudens wrote him and said, you know, do we have to have that motto on there, "In God We Trust"? He said, I'd like to have more space for my artistic conception and so on, and this sort of interferes with it. So Roosevelt looked into the law pretty deeply. He had his people check, and they said, well, no, it's a little bit murky, but probably it's okay to leave it off. You know, it's kind of optional. And so they left it off in 1907, and there was a firestorm of, you know, people saying, these are godless coins. Where's "In God We Trust"? You know, and huge political pressure came on stream and through Congress, and Roosevelt was very stubborn about it. He said, well, you know, he wrote letters to the newspaper saying why he didn't want the motto, you know, that these coins are circulating in evil places, dirty places, you know, and here we are with God's name, you know, putting them in he came up with all kinds of reasons. But in the end, he had to bow to the political pressure. And so he said, well, okay, you guys do what you want, you know. And so Congress mandated it, you know, that it had to be on the coins. So, you know, we do have a few 1907 examples that don't have it. But, and then the story goes on, you know, there's always been some opposition to it, saying, well, it's unconstitutional, you know, we're mixing religion and government and so on. And there's some famous protagonists of this. A woman named Madalyn Murray O'Hair, you've probably heard of, you older folks have heard of her. She was a very noted atheist, and she did numerous court cases about this. And she did succeed in getting a prayer taken out of public schools, but she never succeeded in getting the motto taken off. And the Supreme Court and some of the lower courts have ruled that, well, it's sort of ceremonial deism, so it doesn't really violate the Constitution. And that's been kind of the controlling legal authority that's prevented it from being removed. But there's continuing opposition, and there are constant court cases about it. So I don't know what the future holds, but anyway, that's pretty much the story.
Well, once again, Bill, thank you for
thank you.
sharing your knowledge with us today. And very informative. And it's kind of interesting when you look at 1864 when Bill City did the research in regards to not much or neutral to the time of 1907 when you have an uproar. So that'll tell you they got kind of used to it.
That's true.
So on behalf of the association, we once again thank you for being a friend of Pan and always being here over many years and helping in the exhibit area as well. And the token of appreciation certificate from us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And do you have your books with you?
Yes, I do have books if
There are
anybody's
some
interested.
books, and are you going to be right
Yeah,
over here?
I'll be right
Near
over
the
here.
exhibit
Yeah,
area. If
yeah.
anyone would like a copy and purchase,
I'll
we'll
sign
be
it
happy
for
to
you
sign
if
it
you
for
want.
you.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a little adjournment.
I just want to say one thing. Tom was extremely helpful to me all through this process and doing the. He gave me hints about go talk to this guy or go talk to. He knows Pennsylvania.
We ended up in above Hershey. Milton.
Milton. Yeah, Milton was Pollock's hometown. So he gave me.
We were in the rain at Pollock's grave.
Yeah,
Let's put it that way.
yeah,
On the
yeah.
anniversary. Yeah, we were up there for the anniversary.
That's right. Yep. Yeah. Very
Good
helpful.
memories.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.